So let's learn more causes of the French Revolution, why it took place. So the king at that time was King Louis, and what happened was the character of the monarch of Louis King was very incompetent and unpopular leadership. So the people in his leadership were not fond of it, and people did not really like him. And this king did care very little for the people, the common people, which means the third class. उसको कोई privilege नहीं देता था, उनके बारे में कुछ नहीं सोचता था. उसके अलावा that king brought French finance to bankruptcy. French was one of the most wealthiest country in Europe at that time, but he brought it to bankruptcy, which means that the economy of France got very bad in his rule. And all he wanted was to maintain a lavish palace in Versailles. Versailles is a place in Europe, and he refused to tax the privileged classes, whereas the lower classes used to pay the like. Previously, the first and the second classes, apart from his rule, they used to pay the taxes, but not at a very large amount, but they did used to pay the taxes. But in his rule, the first and the second class stopped paying any taxes. And he also ignored the advices of his finance ministers. He was supposed to listen to the finance ministers, मगर इसने बोला नहीं भाई, जो मैं बोल रहा हूँ बस वही होगा. And this was the royal family at that time and how they used to live. So when the French Revolution began, what happened was that when the third class demanded equality in the State General. State General क्या था? That was the higher authority जहाँ पे डिसीजंस दिए जाते थे. ठीक है, वहाँ पे सिर्फ फर्स्ट से सेकंड क्लास अलाउड थी एंड दे हैड द से. बट थर्ड क्लास जो है आफ्टर इनलाइटनमेंट दे गॉट टू नो कि भाई हमें भी जो है बोलना चाहिए अपने राइट्स के लिए. So the third class stood up and they demanded equality in the State General. ठीक है, and they demanded that each member, not each state, to have one vote. King Louis denied the request. He said, मैंने सुनी आपकी बात, हम तो वैसे ही करेंगे जैसे हमें चाहिए. ठीक है. Then what happened was the storming of Versailles. This was the event that took place. As you can see in the picture, what happened was कि वहाँ पे hated prison in Paris where people were held without charge. वहाँ पे क्या हुआ, लोगों ने कुछ किया नहीं था मगर लोगों को पकड़ के ले गए गवर्नमेंट के लोग. ठीक है, वहाँ पे किंग के जो लोग थे वो लोगों को पकड़ के ले गए. वहाँ पे क्या हुआ, पीसेंस वो अटैक, पीसेंस जो थर्ड क्लास फार्मर्स थे उनको ले गए उठा के बाय द नोबल्स ऑफ द कैसल. जो कैसल में नोबल्स रहते थे वो लोग उनको उठा के ले गए. इसकी वजह से बहुत ज़्यादा ना डिसऑर्डर हो गया एंड the farmers and the peasants stood up, the third stage stood up and they started to protest against all of this because they didn't do anything wrong, right? So why were they attacked by the nobles? And you can see in the picture what was happening. The peasants attacked the castle over there. It was in the Versailles. Versailles is a place in Europe as well. It is basically a palace. So in the National Assembly, it abolished the special privileges of the privileged class, which were the first and the second class. No more feudal payments by the peasants. No more tells payments to the church. That were the taxes that were paid to the church. No more taxes exemption from the privileged classes. So the privileged class also had to pay the taxes. उसके अलावा no more class distinction, मतलब all the classes were equal as well. Then the National Assembly's finance measure, because there were a lot of corruption in the system, so they had to measure the finances as well. Land of the nobility and the church were confiscated and sold at low prices to the peasants. तो जितनी भी लैंड और एरियाज थे वो जो है नोबल्स और चर्चेस के बिकना शुरू हो गए to everybody, not only to the peasants or the farmers, to everybody who wanted to buy them at a very low cost to fulfill the financial problems of the country. Then there came the Declaration of Rights of Men and French Constitution. So in the Declaration of Rights of Men, it stated that all men were free and equal. So all the classes were treated equally. All citizens were entitled to a voice in making the nation's law, which means that all the states were allowed to make laws for themselves. इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि कुछ भी लॉ बना लें, मगर हर स्टेट का, हर सोशल क्लास की से होनी चाहिए in making laws and decisions and all of those things. Then freedom from unlawful arrest, मतलब randomly किसी को arrest कर लिया, किसी को पकड़ लिया, किसी को मार दिया, ये सब ख़त्म होना चाहिए. So freedom from unlawful arrest. Freedom of speech, press and religion, as people were free to follow whatever religion they wanted to follow. Press were free. Press were at that time was a newspaper, so it was free to publish any news that were real and fake news नहीं, मगर सच्ची जो बात है वो आप पब्लिश कर सकते हैं. एंड एवरीबडी हैड द राइट. फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच मीन्स they could say whatever they felt for themselves is right. So they had the freedom of speech were given to the men. So this was the declaration of rights of men. उसके अलावा in the French Constitution of 1791 it was established a limit of monarchy's power. It means that जो king होगा उसको पूरी power नहीं दी जाएगी. He would be having some power but not unlimited power. He would be limited to his power. Then there will be a legislative assembly established where the people would come and speak for themselves. Assembly member elected by tax-paying citizens, not by any social classes or the money they owned. Then what happens was that the king dements, matlab he died, and with him the old regime also demised. And due to the loss of his power, conspired the foreign monarchs arrest the revolution. Louis and Marie Antoinette attempted to flee out of France, but captured and tried for treason and sentenced to death by the guillotine. Guillotine was the method of execution by beheading. Beheading मतलब गला काट दिया जाता था उस ज़माने में. And this was the method. ये भी जो है ना execution का method that was very inhumane. So they also took it out and they abolished this method as well.